Welcome, everybody. My name is Rob Kenner. I'm a senior editor at Complex Media, and I'm glad that all of you could join us here in the flesh and digitally, virtually around the Google diaspora. And I'm joined by Mr. Mark Ecko. Round of applause.
They add like the roar track, right? that you'll just cut that in. It'll be like,
Or the Norman Lear canned laughter.
Right.
So
with the delayed hand clap, yeah.
we're counting on the laugh lines to go
Right.
over really big today, so please participate.
Follow the applaud signs, if you will.
Yeah. So you may know Mark Ecko as the designer of the Rhinoceros T-shirts and as a fly MC. There's a lot of different items on his resume, but today he's here in the guise of an author. His book, Unlabel, Selling You Without Selling Out, is, as he describes it, the textbook you wish you had when you were in school. Right?
Yes.
Now, it's called Unlabel.
Yes.
Tell me what labels were put on you that you undid.
Well, I think, what I tried to do with the book was build a kind of a business book for the creative class. And in an age where we have all these efficiencies of self-broadcasting because of digital media, I wanted to write a book that had a subtext about personal branding, but without being this patronizing, goopy personal branding book, which those books tend to be like, right? Okay. So the spirit of the name Unlabel was, it had kind of a few meanings. One, the brand that I launched was called Ecko Unlimited, so it was playing up on the UN, like the from Unlimited. And secondly, I was playing up on this notion of the fact that we, it's just human nature. People project labels onto us. They want to organize us in the world like a product, if we like it or not, if we know it or not. Sometimes with good intent or with decent intent to make people's lives more efficient, and sometimes with kind of not so good intent. So in a world where people are so kind of easily spewing out their persona, their brand, I was trying to make the reader flat-footed and have kind of an analog conversation about what it means to build a personal brand, what it means to live up to that brand, the brand that you perceive, right, which is the label, like the exterior veneer, the flourishes, the outside packaging, and the label you have to put to bed at night, which is, the one that's guts to the skin. So like kind of how do you discern and distinguish between your inside brand, your kind of inside label, and your exterior one? And how do you not parrot, like either with intent, or with poor intent or misguided intent to the perceived, skin to the world brand. So the book kind of just, in a digital age, tries to have a not too serious conversation, but something that helps people kind of understand my philosophy on branding and maybe how that might, be helpful to their personal brand, if it's their personal singular brand or their group, collective, we, company brand.
Now, what I love about the book is it's not like a typical sort of Trump book.
Right.
Where, it's all about the W's and the
right.
L's kind of get airbrushed out.
Right.
To be clear, you did grow an airbrushing business from your parents' garage into a company with $1 billion of revenue.
That's right.
And you founded Complex Media, which is killing the game right now. But let's talk about the L's, because those are teachable moments, aren't they?
Yeah. I think, this book is designed not to be what a lot of those kind of maybe very 90s style type A personality business books, like the guy parachutes out of the plane, like Richard Branson style, and like doesn't fail. I think this book is more of like instead of being a book on greatest hits, it's more of a book on my greatest misses, and I'm someone who really likes to be honest and even painfully at times, masochistically honest about, my idiosyncrasies, my failures, just because it's I don't believe, like how failures are taught to be in school, that you should be ashamed of them. K through 12, the sentence we all go through, that K through 12 sentence that we all get, no matter like the state puts us to go through,
Right.
public, private, or otherwise, we're taught that failure is something to be embarrassed by. It's something that you ridicule. It's something to be ashamed by. And it's just funny how in business that success never really quite looks like an A. And failure never quite looks like an F, and how much value there is in the learnings of failure. So I try to have a really honest conversation about failure and put it out there in a way that maybe people have perceived me as this guy that's built this big business, has all these kind of collected all this stuff, right? The trappings of success. But I didn't make the book about gushing around about the stuff I collected. Right? Like the real value and the real wealth that I talk about in the book, the wealth that matters, can't really be counted like money, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny how the wealth that matters can be distributed differently as well.
Definitely. There's a part in the book where you talk about getting into denim.
Yeah.
And just your way of sort of feeling your way through that, and I
Right.
thought that was an instructive anecdote.
Yeah.
Is there a way you could boil that down for?
Was that the book? That's the part in the book where I meet with Wu, the denim supplier. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And
the rivets.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, look, I mean, today, the world we live in, young designers and young product makers today, the world's a much different world, right? The market, we don't, there's this thing you guys probably have heard of, it's called Google. So if you ask it, you can find out a lot of shit, right? So back when I was coming up, like the Google was like looking at the inside label of whatever I was wearing, right? So I'd like look at the inside of, my Gap hoodie or whatever, and it was like made in Hong Kong. Like, where is Hong Kong? Is that by India? Like so much my education was so. But I literally just packed a bag and like found myself over there. But that was only after I attempted to try to figure it all out in the States. And that's the anecdote you're asking about, where I had found a denim maker. I forget where they were, in the South somewhere, and they put like all the rivets and shanks on in the wrong manner, and they all popped off. So I remember like shipping them months late, and then having, after we got the first return, having to manually fix that stuff ourselves, in our warehouses. But there are a lot of like kind of anecdotes like that of stuff that you don't really contemplate, like the consequences of the things you make and the kind of complexities of them,
Right.
and how they kind of affect you don't anticipate that they're going to go wrong, but they do.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
But what I love about your candor in telling these stories is it gets back to this idea of authenticity,
Right.
Keeping it real in hip hop lingo. You actually break down the formula of authenticity in the book, which is kind of a closely guarded secret. You mentioned that Malcolm Gladwell gave you props for attempting to break down authenticity. And it's sort of akin to the Google algorithm. Like how do you penetrate the mystery of authenticity?
Right. Well, I think it was a little bit what a part of the book is about, and the book being framed like a textbook was a little bit taking the piss out of these kind of prescriptive methods of kind of arriving at a best practice, as if you could really prescribe an algorithm for authenticity, as if, right? It's like we all bought into that whole equals MC squared thing, but I mean, if we really vetted it, like, really, like we all just agree, because you see the guy with the crazy hair, and like we all told genius. And I mean, yeah, I'm not trying
guys with crazy hair are always genius.
Right. I mean, I know this from Rob, right? So we all know this, right? Right. So, but to your point, hip hop and coming up in the 80s, when hip hop was this thing, you had to go find it. It didn't find you, in the way that it kind of is so woven into popular culture and consumer products and our media narratives and our language, right? So there was, in its kind of prepubescent phase, hip hop had this awkwardness about it, about its comfort or lack of comfort around commercializing itself, around, quote, crossing over.
Right.
So there was a lot of tension coming up in the 80s around keeping it real, right? And this notion of like what's real, what's not, what's authentic, what's not. And there are all kinds of layers of subtext there that, that depending on who you ask have different meanings. But that was certainly something that was one of the things that kind of dogged hip hop in its kind of, early prepubescent years. And even to this day, real hardcore hip hop enthusiasts will take a default, almost cynical view on anything that tries to commercialize in a certain way, where the monetization strategy is kind of overt, right? Less today, but certainly when I was coming up. So that was a theme of in the subtext of my story, and as a part of the book, of that kind of, always having to answer to, quote, gatekeepers who would challenge what was authentic or not. So not being kind of blue blood pedigree fashion designer, you can imagine what it was like to get into the CFDA, and I talk about that in the book, the Council of Fashion Designers of America, and some of those kind of cultural, I'll use the word prejudices that ecosystem has as gatekeepers around streetwear and urban fashion design, right?
Just the word urban.
Yeah, right. It was like so loaded, right? So that's not real fashion design. That's not authentic. And then all the way down to like coming up in my Rutgers college age is like, look, white Jewish kid, right? Into hip hop. Going to Rutgers, it was nothing like Lakewood, in that Lakewood was, kind of this microcosm, and then Rutgers is much more of a macrocosm of how people really kind of socially accepted people across kind of racial lines and boundaries. So like coming up in the early 90s, I graduated high school in 1990, so going off to Rutgers, there were definitely people that looked down their nose, black and white and otherwise, right? They were kind of like a little bit skeptical. Like, who's this kid like coming up in the space, airbrushing t-shirts, talking about graffiti? That's not really graffiti, that's airbrush, that's not authentic.
Right.
So what the book attempts to do is take what the best practices of authenticity are. And I assign this formula. It's kind of convoluted, it's a little clunky, but I think it frames like the real important components to creating an authentic expression, an authentic interaction, communication. And it kind of, the components just on a high level, there's the notion of the unique voice, the role of selfishness, one's creative selfishness and intent, which is often when we get all kumbaya and want to design by committee, we lose that selfish perspective, right? Truthfulness, right? Truthfulness being defined, by your ability to kind of do more than you say, because there's a lot culturally, we're just busy talking. And in this era of social media, we almost think because we said it, we did it. But it's not really like, talking and action, two discernibly different things, right? But really I take the piss out of it. Even though there's this guideline, but it's not that prescriptive, like here's step 1 through 5 on how to be authentic and have an authentic interaction at work, right? No, it's not like that. It is by design philosophical and modeled in a way to kind of make you flat-footed so that people kind of come to the terms of like, well, that was his way of prescribing to kind of what's the core, to the core spine of his brand, which in his view, in my view, was the desire to be as transparent and as authentic as possible, good, bad, and indifferent.
Yeah. Now, this idea of selling out, as you mentioned, is less of a hindrance to hip hop today.
Right.
The pursuit of profit is nothing to be ashamed of anymore.
Yeah.
And I would say probably one of the cultural figures who helped usher that in was Puffy.
Yeah.
It's all
Sean
about
Combs.
the Benjamins.
Yeah.
We call him Puffy from those days. Diddy today.
Diddy.
Talk about how he served as a kind of a Yoda for you, or
I talk about in the book how I have like these kind of unintentional Yodas, that they don't necessarily always dress or look the part, and they don't always tell you, they don't always answer the question by answering the question, but rather by asking the question. So in some ways, Puff was like this interesting, almost Cheshire Cat-like character who seemed to be able to be in more than one place at once. And I perceived that brand of celebrity as what, if I wanted to kind of, quote, get that red carpet heat, the thing to parrot to. Mm-hmm. And I quickly learned that I wasn't built for that, right? Okay. That's what I talk about in the book.
Right.
But there was a lot that he taught me just in relationship to being more true to what I was defining as, quote, success for creating media attention for myself, rather than trying to parrot to more of a kind of brash entertainer style kind of grab for media, which came to him innately. You know, and you know, so there are many characters like that throughout the book, in my journey that I was able to kind of glean a lot from. Yeah.
You have a cover blurb from George Lucas, which is kind of baller in itself.
Not bad.
And I mean, he goes on at length. There's a photo of you two building.
Yeah.
You know, you're a big Star Wars fan.
Yeah.
How did you actually connect with this guy who had such an impact on
you?
you?
Well, one of the things I talk about as an ingredient in the formula of authenticity is this notion of the range of emotional impact and the importance of creating emotional impacts as a product of what you do. It's not what you make, it's how you make people feel, right? So I use the anecdote and how I got to George Lucas, who I'm obviously a fanboy of. And in a lot of ways, I learned more from studying his business in terms of how he configured his business around licensing than I did, let's say, out of studying Calvin Klein or Ralph Lauren, right? I was able to extrapolate more, like it came to me, the learnings of licensing came to me more intuitively through studying him than, you know, folks in the fashion space. But the way that I got to him in that kind of pursuit of creating emotional impact is that, well, actually, funny enough, we were, I saw that there was a fundraiser and they were going to honor George Lucas here in the city, and I got invited to it. They want us to buy a table, right?
Okay, sure.
So I'm thinking, oh shit, George Lucas will be there. I could bum rush him, and it's going to be like, you know, I could finally, you know, meet him, get like a photo op. This is pre-Instagram. Oops, I'm not supposed to say Instagram inside of Google. Oops. I could have Google Plus with him. Only kidding. All right. I think Google should have an Instagram account. I'm just saying. I think it'd be funny. I think it would be funny. All right, whatever.
We'll edit that later, right? Yeah.
There's the uncomfortable Google laugh in the back.
More of those to come.
But I thought that would be really cool. So, sure enough, 11th hour, about to go to this event. I forget what the crisis was. Had to go put out a forest fire somewhere, like in my production pipeline. I had to travel overseas.
Ah, jeez.
So. We were just launching at around that time Complex. I remember that I was going to bring the new Complex staff and some of my Echo marketing team to that dinner. And in the 11th hour, I can't go. So it occurs to me, I was like, I'm going to send my action figure. I have a 12-inch action figure of George Lucas, like this really rare collectible action figure that I got from like, you know, Shibuya or somewhere in like, you know, in Tokyo or somewhere, like some like cool random toy spot, like the spot where they're like, not for sale, and you're like, it's for sale, you know, and I forgot what I paid,
peeling off,
just peeling off bills. Right. So I was like, I say to my man who one of my good friends worked for me for years and now has his own little agency, a guy named Coltrane Curtis, not so little. I say, Train, take a picture with Little George and Big George. If there's anything that happens tonight, get a picture of Little George with Big George. Can you do that? He's like, I can do that, like, right?
Yes.
So I remember I'd come back from the trip and he has printed out, because those were the days you printed photos.
Okay.
At a pharmacy.
Right.
It's crazy.
Dwayne Reed or
crazy
right.
technology.
Okay.
Right? So like Gutenberg style. And he had a stack of photos with Little George and Big George together, and like Little George and like real little Martin Scorsese, who's little in real life. Right? So there were like all these great photos. So years later, so Victory. So that was like my first instance of an emotional impact as a product, right? I didn't know that's what I was designing in terms of like that instance, right? Years later, another fundraiser, where Spike Lee was celebrating the anniversary of like 40 Acres and a Mule. And he did a thing on like a Carnival cruise line, like a new Carnival cruise line that pulled into the city. And I said, of course I'm going to go. And I didn't even know that George Lucas was going to be there. So walk in and I see George Lucas. He's like in my line of sight. And he's wearing a white linen double suit, like double-breasted. It was a naval theme, like a Navy theme. He was looking like Gatsby, like harsh, real, like his hair. I don't know how he does that, right? So I see him and I walk up and I see that there's some guy, this douchebag from like Kodak, like getting in his ear about how George, your films just don't look warm like they used to, and when they were on film, and he's just getting at him. So I break out my little BlackBerry at the time, which was like there used to be a company called BlackBerry, right? And I had it with a little Yoda etched in it, right? So. And I go, I walk right up to him really loud. I'm like, Lord Lucas, are there any more that I should, like remove their head or whatever? And he starts laughing, like the douchebag guy walks away. So I start to chat, and I'm like, do you remember meeting Little George? And he's like, what are you talking? I'm like, the 12-inch action figure. I do remember. I'm like, that was mine. That was kind of the way that I connected with him.
Blew his mind right there.
Yeah. So between the saber sounds and that much planning, he was like, you know what? I will take a meeting. So I asked for a meeting to contemplate him if he would license the archives to do some stuff with our fashion product, and we did that for years. So it was really cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So would that have been, technically speaking, a swag bomb?
Well, I think that's an instance of swag bombs are usually solicited via mail or by delivery.
Okay, but Little George was sort of like a
that was
3
like
years prior swag bomb.
Yeah, that was kind of like more of like that notion of like, don't underestimate when you want to make an impact on someone. I mean, don't like take your shirt off in front of them. Don't do like wacky stuff like that or like antisocial or not too antisocial. But there's something to be said about, deliberately thought out, meaningful human interactions. And that when you could do something bespoke for someone, and for young people coming up with their businesses or new products or services, not to underestimate the value of those kind of interactions, not to just presume because you sent an email with a PDF, like that's gonna, seal the deal. We get like those sense of like gratification because I checked the box, I sent it. Not to underestimate like showing up and again, not being like stalker weirdo. I talk about this idea of swag bombs in the book as how I did early product placement, where I would like airbrush jackets and T-shirts and give away stuff to like emerging celebrities in the music scene.
DJ Red Alert was the first, right?
Yeah, cool. DJ Red Alert, who's here, like a New York City, legendary, iconic, both influential and like at the label level and on the radio level in terms of his relationship with, Tribe Called Quest and all of like kind of native tongue
BDP,
scene. BDP, all those guys. So. But I would send, those were like mailed packages, but very customly made. And a lot of people ask me that are in like services businesses, like that are like, well, okay, I get how swag bombs could be meaningful because you had a product and you could kind of customize it and it's an actual tangible product and it looks like, and I said, it's hard for me to do that because I have some SaaS B2B product. And I say, oh, bullshit. Like your product ultimately is satisfying some kind of an analog thing for whoever's using it. Either it's saving them time or it's saving them money or a blend of all of the above, whatever. So you thinking about what object expresses or is a metaphor for what your product does and delivering it to someone, there's value to it. It's old school, but there's real value to that. And a lot of people just think, well, I send flowers or a bottle of wine or a nice handwritten note. No, like really be deliberate and think about that stuff. It's really powerful. And to this day, I get things like the things that really impact me are when people, and since I've wrote the book, I've seemed to be getting a lot more like swag bombs.
People are catching on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or at least they're trying to play to that. And I warn people in the book, please don't do that.
And not to the house.
Right, not to the house.
Yeah, right.
Which I've gotten, which is really weird.
creepy.
Yeah.
No, but I love the image of you straight spamming the fax machine of 98.7 Kiss.
Yeah.
While Red
Yeah.
Alert is on the air.
That's right.
And then eventually you send him the custom jacket, and he gives you the big shout out on the air.
Yeah, I would go to the Kinko's and I would draw these really custom drawn, illustrated, cover letters, and I would just spam the hell out of, like, he had to recognize my solicitation.
Right.
I figured I'm worthy of a shout out.
Yes.
And he eventually did, and it was very cool.
That's good stuff. You talk about a dream of Tommy Hilfiger in the book.
Yes.
It comes to you in a vision. It's a kind of a surreal image, actually, with, you show up at the sort of, the imaginary Hilfiger perfect, chateau with, sort of mannequin model characters all
Right.
around. But then he's a little bit disheveled and
Right.
it seems a little different than you might have expected.
Well, I think that what I was trying to do in the subtext of that little, and it's a persistent theme throughout the book, which is this notion that seems to be people have really kind of stuck to with the book, which is, look, we live in a culture where perception is reality. I mean, my first PR person told me that, and the book, I try to testify to say, hey, well, actually, reality is reality.
Okay.
And a lot of our judgments and our relationships with other people are informed by those games of perception. Again, back to the very first question of, like, the brand you perceive, skin to the world, versus the brand that's like the interior, inside, guts to the skin brand.
Right.
So that dream was kind of me taking the piss out of my own relationship with the fashion industry. My expectations of acceptance are kind of peer review. My wantedness of, like, a peer acceptance from whom I perceived as a tier of as the elite of fashion, right? Because those were the gatekeepers. So in the dream, which is a real, like, look, I embellish because it's a book, right? And it was I was trying to be a little bit hyperbolic, but I do recall that whole interaction and timing being very serendipitous because I had an interaction with Tommy in real life at that same time.
Okay.
So it was kind of almost like my psyche warning me, like, dude, it's not going to be what you think it is. Like, it's not what you think it's going to be. Like you visualize this, like, ultra sexy, glamorous, perfect, like, everything's like as I imagine, how we perceive it to be, like, to work for Google, right? Right? But it probably, like, for a lot of people sucks. I mean, right? So, I mean,
We can
it's not
talk in
terrible.
private
Like,
after.
I mean,
yeah.
stock options are great, but I mean, your boss is a dick, right? Not Larry and Sergey, but, like, the guy you really report to. But because people are the emotional creatures, But I think that was that section of the book is kind of me. Kind of getting comfortable in my skin with my own relationship with my career. Right. Because I always kind of begrudged, like, I was the schlepper who painted T-shirts in my garage, like, as if that was something to not be proud of, rather than to use that kind of rough around the edges, crunchy on the outside, soft in the middle kind of vibe as my entryway in business. And I talk about where that's when I was launching Marc Ecko Cut and Sew, and I had a fierce case of Ralph Laurenitis, where it's like I try to parrot the kind of best practices of, like, the elite, best in class in an industry. Like he's an ambassador grade, level practitioner.
Right.
And what the world doesn't need someone being a bad copy of Ralph Lauren. The world needs, like, Marc Ecko growing up.
Yeah.
Right? And I thought that the world needed another, like, do as Ralph does. And not that Ralph Laurenitis, it wasn't to begrudge or disparage Ralph Lauren. He's GOAT, right? Like,
right.
GOAT, right? The real greatest of all time. I mean, that can happen in other industries. I know other guys in technology, engineers, marketing guys that, like, have, like, this kind of weird relationship with what they perceive to be greatness, and then they end up a lot of their career actually finding their way by parroting them rather than kind of embracing good, bad, and indifferent, the things that define their strengths and sometimes their weaknesses to differentiate them. And I kind of came comfortable in my own skin saying, look, I'm an artist first, I'm an illustrator. I'm a strong illustrator. Like I'm way ahead of my fashion design skills. So I've now, with older age, become more comfortable, just for better or worse, embracing that kind of clunkiness and saying like that's what's going to set my brand and differentiate my brand, rather than me trying to parrot and be a Me Too version of someone else's brand.
Right. Well, you were into polo from Slick Rick days.
Yeah,
right?
man.
I mean,
yeah.
that was
yeah. I mean,
the gold standard.
Yeah. Polo cologne too.
Oh man.
Yeah, man.
So let's talk about Complex real
Sure.
quick. We have some of the Complex OGs in the building.
Yes.
Shout to Brendan, Jack, and Donnie.
Thank you guys for coming.
We rolled deep today, but I mentioned those three in particular because you guys remember when Complex decided to do this crazy website thing, right? And you know, at the time, print media was the shit, and you know, doing a website was this other thing that you did on the side. And I think, Brendan, at one point you expressed doubt whether it would ever reach 1 million page views. So anyway, now it's, depending when you check Quantcast, it's up among the top 200 sites on the whole internet. Tell us why people told you Complex was a bad idea.
Oh, because, you know, I make sweatshirts, right? Because like you're supposed to like stay in your lane, you know, and the desire to create it came from a place where I, as a buyer of media, and as this guy who kind of came up in that kind of that 80s diaspora, and then, you know, and kind of watching the mainstreaming of kind of hip hop and like its influence to kind of like have this convergence thing happen. Mm-hmm. You know, in the late 80s, it was crossing over. Come like the mid-late 90s, people were like, oh, it's convergence. You know, totally. They started looking at it like this way, right. Obliquely, right? But as a media buyer, I would get frustrated because if I wanted to kind of make a presentation in men's fashion or do like a better streetwear thing, it was hard to get convincingly the edit community at GQ to take that stuff seriously. Like they would take your dollars, but the advertising, and because of their kind of disposition and their view, their cultural view on like streetwear, they were like, it's not really fashion. But where was I going to launch like the Marc Ecko brand? I had to put like you would launch your media dollars there, right? Because
sure.
that's where men's fashion goes. Details, GQ. Same thing for music. Like if I wanted to do like alternative, or at the time was like kind of my European distributors were into this thing that was called at the time. I mean, I don't know that they called it EDM, but it was like early EDM. Like you'd be in
House.
Yeah, like you'd be in like Herb magazine, right? And then if you're hip hop, you're like The Source, and if you're skate, you're Thrasher. So the idea was, I just saw, maybe in a slightly diluted state, that there were these inefficiencies, and that I saw this convergence thing happening, that things were not just black or white, you know, just hip hop or alternative or rock or just high, low. They were complex.
You unlabeled media, basically.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't. Now at 41 with the book behind me, I could say that, but I didn't think that at the time. I just was like a little bit like, wow, I'm looking at my media spend. Our business is growing as a percentage of revenue. Like you're starting to buy some serious media dollars. You're like, fuck, we could do this. We can make a business out of this, right? Rather than just inefficiently buy media, right. And then maybe hopefully solve something for the rest of the space and help kind of verify and validate the space, which is a lot of like entrepreneurs that kind of came up within the skate and street scene have helped kind of legitimize as a community like our business practices and like, you know, create scale for us as an ecosystem. So, you know, to Rich Antonello's credit, who's my partner and CEO of Complex, it was really his leadership in 2007, which was not an easy year financially, you know, for the Ecko business, certainly. And the way the business is configured at the time is that if Complex, even though Complex was pointing north from just bringing, you know, he actually delivered that print thing in the black, which is kind of rare. You know, that's kind of crazy to think you can make print at that time profitable. And you know, but his dependency on our financing was all contingent on how well or not well the Ecko business was doing. So we had him on rubbing two nickels, making fireworks thing. And really, it was his leadership that that productized and visualized the online play. And it was a very analog kind of perspective. It was like, look, I've got all these ad sales executives who are really qualified, but I can't keep up with their costs on, a 330 circ print product. It just the math wasn't lining up.
Right.
So we naively, for better or worse, and iteratively jumped in. So we were very fortunate of being, and believing in this concept, at the right time, right place as well.
But it wasn't only Rich's vision and his business acumen, but also his wrestling skills that came into play.
Oh yeah, I mean his physicality to basically just coerce people physically.
I mean,
which is all in the book. It's on page 184.
I'm thinking of a particular individual that he coerced. Your partner, Seth.
My former partner Seth.
Yes.
They had to physically wrestle it out in order to
get
budget
the budget negotiation.
Yeah, budget approved. Yeah. It was a physical match.
And may the best man win.
Seth really thought he was going to have him. No. So, but to his credit, and then the teams, and I mean, and it's just been an amazing platform that's been built, and a lot of really intelligent and creative folks, and I'm very blessed to be a part of it.
Another of my favorite anecdotes in the book, and just in terms of taking a difficult situation and flipping it, is the whole Where's Echo non-trade show that turned Vegas upside down during Magic Weekend.
Yeah.
Can you just give a little bit of the genesis of how that came about?
That also spoke in the framework to that kind of whole notion of range of emotional impact, right?
Right.
Here we were at a place where we were really on the balls of our ass financially. Okay.
On the balls of your ass.
Like the flattest part of your ass when you stretch your legs. And the part that if you sit on it, there's no flesh there, you really got to, anyways.
Ouch.
Yeah. So it hurts, right? So we were financially in a pickle. It's that's in the book, how we got there. We kind of self-made, kind of self-wound. But we were at a place where the costs of the trade shows and the optionality of funding those trade shows just was not an option. But the irony of that time is that we had a massive pull in the market. So from a supply-demand, business, the demand side was high. And we couldn't afford to fund the trade show, so we already bought the space, so we leased the space with the folks that manage those conventions. This was in Las Vegas. It's like an industry, like the American big, sportswear industry trade show. It's called Magic, so we were already on the hook for whatever that was.
Right.
But the notion of having to fund, the booth and shipping all the staff, that option wasn't great. So we ran it. We ran an Audible. And we said, okay, let's just ask the industry, where's Echo? So we own the booth. So what we'll do is our setup costs will just be the rental fee of a red velvet rope going around the perimeter of this oversized gargantuan booth that we really couldn't afford. And it's one of the reasons we were in debt. And in the middle, there'd be a table. Right. And there'd be a little tea stand or whatever, and it would say, "Where's Echo?" And then we'd proceed to run a risk assessment of what it would cost to basically bomb Vegas with stickers, and we paste posters and cardboard, real Wu-Tang style. We just got up everywhere in Vegas, and we took a suite at whatever hotel. It was something decent, but a modest budget, and that's where we did our bookings from. And we ended up booking more at that show, our non-show, than we had ever in the history of that the trade show to that time.
But the first day was looking a little grim, right?
It was looking grim, yeah, and it turned around. It all turned around, and it informed our view just generally on how to then, because after you did that show, you're like, we can't come back. You can't be fuck you, Magic, and then come back and be like, we're back, So we set up we found one of their Achilles heels, which was right across the street from the convention center. There's this really, it's kind of, I don't want to say anything disparaging, but it's a bar and we rented the parking lot of that bar, and we put up what we called the Middle Finger Pavilion, which was like right in the line of sight of the trade show and in walking distance. So we ended up, doing our trade shows outside of the trade show.
The Middle Finger Pavilion.
Yeah, that was the nickname. Yeah, yeah,
That's just remarkable.
yeah.
Are we getting the signal? Okay. Well, that seems like a great time to turn the microphones over to those who are in attendance. I know that you want to know more about the Middle Finger Pavilion or where exactly the balls of the ass is or anything else like that. No, but please, if you have questions, the mic is open. Don't be shy. Step up. You don't need a swag bomb to get this audience.
Okay.
Yes, here we go.
All right, someone will ask.
We got a live one. Oh, wait, so you got to stand up and come to the mic for that. She moved first, so you're next.
Go ahead. You go ahead. You
You
go first.
I
go.
went. Hi, my name's Mahalit. I'm a big Complex fan. So I guess since there's a lot of you guys, this can be for everybody. A friend of mine recently, we got into an argument because he said that Complex is for men in the same way that BuzzFeed is strictly for women. And I disagreed because I read Complex every day. I don't read BuzzFeed every day. And obviously, like, the articles are better. So I wanted to know what you guys thought about that.
Very perceptive reader.
And
We
if
think that you're right that the articles are better.
just if you guys like purposely, there's some articles obviously I can't get with, like all the men's fashion obviously isn't going to work for me. So I thought, just curious if there were plans on expanding more for women in that fashion, or if you guys think of it as like a primarily male brand, and just what you guys think about that overall.
Yeah, I think I can't speak for everyone, but I could probably. I think the consensus internally is that we do what we do really well, and our disposition is to serve and try to delight this young male demographic. We do know that there is a crossover because a lot of the cultural conversations are broad, but our framework is when we kind of paint a picture of the archetype, we are focused mostly just on men for right now. Yeah. I think though, like I said, there's a lot of these conversations that are generally broad, and there are a lot of women that work inside the company that actually inform the edit. So you're seeing their kind of tone and vibe per kind of, come through the content.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
yeah, and for now it's I think a platform for dudes, right? Yeah.
And guys read Cosmo to get intel, on the other side, right? So probably works both ways. Now, you had a good question. Please come to the mic.
How did you originally get backing behind?
Financial backing?
Yeah.
I talk about it in the book, which is again speaks to the whole subtext of like perception reality, because my perception was that, I'd been servicing and creating relationships with a lot of like celebrities at the time, right? And I presume like that celebrity, their ex, like in this one instance, I don't know if you guys remember a band called, a group called Belle Biv DeVoe. They're a derivative from like New Edition. There's a guy named Michael Bivins who's a real entrepreneurial cat, like very successful, like music producer. I'd actually was airbrushing for him and actually managed to get my friend Khalid Brock, who's mentioned in the book, like signed to his record label through that interaction. So I was going down the rabbit hole of meeting music execs, and I just perceived, right? Well, they have money. Right? Look at the videos, look at their influence. So I kept pounding the drum. If it was Spike Lee, listening Biv, listening a whole bunch of people that were just specifically music industry. And what ended up happening is one of those kind of unsuspecting characters who inadvertently, who didn't look and dress the part of like celebrity, became my partner, a guy named Seth Gertzberg, who literally put the first $5,000 into the company. And he kind of was my commercialization beast, right? Like, as a band goes, right? The composition of the original company was my twin sister Marcy, who I talk about this in the book. She was like governance, like she governed like kept like the boys from killing each other. And then there was, my partner Seth, who was like the brute force and like the commercialization. And then I was kind of like the swag and the brand and kind of the emotional part of the equation. But in tandem, we went out there and kind of slowly, from that initial $5,000 investment, he managed to coerce another group that he was doing business with. I talk about it in the book. And they were our initial seed investors. And we eventually, bought them out. Cool. Yeah. But it's not an easy, getting funding. Like that's the trick question, right? Or that's the $25,000 question. No pun intended, or pun maybe intended. But there's no single one way to do it, obviously. And what's so fascinating today with what's going on culturally with like platforms like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, and a lower path, a lower threshold because of Google, the fact that you could kind of from Google or not just directly go to Alibaba or wherever and source things domestically, overseas, the barrier to enter, if you want to learn, if there's a wantedness, is sufficiently lower, but it's that much noisier now. So that's why branding is a really, crucial part of the equation.
Thanks.
Cheers.
My name's Kennedy. I appreciate you coming out today. My question is, did you ever feel lost on this journey? I imagine that a lot of entrepreneurs, they feel like they're the only one in the world that feels a certain way. And clearly you had that drive to keep you going. How do you keep yourself focused? Or did you have a mentor that said, you know what, just like shut up and keep on doing it? Did you have anything sort of like that?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that if you took them away from me in my life, that I'd probably really be well below average. One is having grown up in Lakewood, New Jersey, which was a very diverse place, and at a time where diversity, where hip hop was emerging. So like that has informed the lens in which I view the world is viewed through that lens of Lakewood. So that gives me a very different kind of cultural view on stuff. So that's one. Two is I have a twin sister, right? So, and everything they say about twins is true, right? In terms of, best friend and all of that. So if you were to take Marcy, and she's as a character throughout the book, I describe her as my ghost of reason. So in a lot of ways, I had this really interesting kind of yin to my yang, someone who's not as, she's not a visual artist. Like she doesn't need for the fanfare, maybe in the way that I'm more of a narcissist, right? So I had that throughout my adolescence, and then in my career, and to this day where I still work with Marcy very closely, that served me in a way that I can't contemplate life or business without that. And my role with my relationships with mentors have been, it's funny because I think a lot of people prescribe to that idea of like, will you be my mentor? And like they're like kind of think of them like their shrink, and they meet with them like once every 3 weeks at the coffee shop, and it's kind of consistent, mostly inconsistent, but like they at parties, I want you to be my mentor. Like I imagine that works. I know people that's worked for, but I found that when there's a wantedness to learn, that learning comes, it's there to be gleaned. And that you could have mentor-like relationships in the most unsuspecting places and in a manner that doesn't necessarily consume their schedule in that kind of rote every 2-3 weeks kind of a way. Mm-hmm. But alone, yeah, of course. I mean, I'm human, right? So that's just, But there's nothing, I'd hate to break it to myself or to any entrepreneur, like we're not unique in feeling alone. It's like, welcome to trying to do shit differently. It's like, and that is, again, a subtext of the book, this relationship of goalkeepers versus gatekeepers. The goalkeepers being ultimately who you're building, trying to execute your vision for, and the gatekeepers being those that guard, like kind of the influencers, the media, maybe a buyer, could be a dean or an academic relationship. But those gatekeeper relationships, so much of what we often do, we want consent from them. We want to comply to their standard, and there's that cultural wantedness. And I would challenge today more than ever that you have to be very cognizant and ask yourself, are you not inadvertently building your product or service for the wrong audience, like versus having a real intellectually honest conversation around who you really like, who the goalkeeper is, who at the consumer level is really, and what do they really need to kind of be contented and to judge you as either executing or not executing. You know, because often you have that social pressure that's here and doesn't have shit to do with your core business. And in fashion, I've seen way too many designers, people way smarter than me, more talented, more creative, build their business there and then end up with a business that's not relevant, right? They're like disconnected from a consumer, like a real at scale. You know, so that's you know, I'd answer that.
So the gatekeepers really aren't as important as they think they are.
Well, I think that culture, it comes from that 12-year sentence that we all had to go through, right? Like, we all wanted the gold star. We're taught, like, but in a self-directed, self-taught, you know, pursuit, which is really the only path of entrepreneurship. Is like your greatest learning kind of comes on some wax on, wax off shit. Like you have to like be at it, right? Learn like and you want that guidance, you want that governance, so that you're not just wandering in the dark. But to think that you have to create the evidence of what's good or complying, and there's that standard, like the way that we're taught K through 12, and that's how it works in the real world. It's really quite not like that. You know, we get very romantic, especially in the big cities, you know, West Coast, East Coast, living in these kind of bubbles of like gatekeeper dominated conversations. Right. And you know, that's definitely something that I've learned to kind of be a little more flip about, and not where, you know, you're out there in fantasy land, like with this fantasy version of like, you know, out wandering, you know, inside joke style. But I think that we give too much credence, and culture will at a place where our university systems don't work. They don't work, okay? Like our education system's really fucking fucked. Like what we need is like Google or someone like that smart to figure the shit out, because we're all chasing like this big oil approach that's all gatekeeper dependent, and that's not really how we're going to end up, you know, being independent in the real world, or you know, financially independent. So that's a real cultural issue.
We're getting the timeout signal.
Cool.
My man Jacob. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you. Appreciate that. Thanks to Google. Yeah.
Yes.
Good vibes, man.
And thanks to Google for GChat and Google Docs, which is how we run
And
Complex.
OG Chat,
Yeah.
which is their new product coming out of Google Labs.
Actually, this is the OG Chat.
We're the engineers on that product.
Yeah, right.
OG Chat. Right. It's very cool. It's a big thing.
And there's books in the back, right?
Yeah, man.
All right.
Cheers. Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
Cheers.
All right.